I'm Lancia, by the way, just in case I didn't do that, and Kenza.
I'm Kenza. So, yes, welcome. I will try to manage the discussion today. If it falls still, I have some questions prepared. We have 3 invited participants, or honored participants, I would say, that have a specific, interesting expertise in this field that I'll introduce them later. So I just wanted to say they shouldn't be the only ones speaking today. Not at all. So I encourage you all to speak up. In order for that to happen well, I set up just one rule, I would say. I call them finger rules. So if you have a new topic to address, you can point out one finger, I will spot you and either write it down or remember. And if you point up 2 fingers, it means you have a follow-up on the topic that's being discussed now. So these have priorities, right? That will make it go easier, and we'll only have one person talking at a time. I hope this won't be too intense, and I hope this will be a nice and easy discussion. Other things. Right, so at some point, Lancia will get up and write some notes on the whiteboards there, and they will help us boil down some interesting questions and reflections at the end of the discussion. So, yeah, that's one thing. And obviously, I want to say be respectful. Everyone has different opinions. Sometimes discussing synthetic biology and ethics around that or morals can be weird and strange and tough. So if it becomes too much, you can also point that out. And be respectful. So we'll be discussing for like an hour. Then for 30 minutes, we'll have a look at the whiteboards and see what we've written down and what we've concluded. And the last 30 minutes, you can just get up, talk, chat, meet each other. Okay? All right. If you can't see the screen, that's okay. There won't be any important information on it. Okay, so first of all, I want to introduce our lovely, lovely guests here. We have Justin. Justin Atkin, he's a YouTuber, almost reached 400K followers. Woo! Yes. And your topics are science in general, a lot of like engineering and synthetic biology. Yes. So you're a DIY biologist, or I don't know how you prefer to call yourself, and you're based here in Montreal. Maybe you can expand a little what that means.
So yeah, I do a fair bit of genetic engineering and general biology. The channel isn't focused on bio specifically, although it is technically the largest bio channel on YouTube, as far as I'm aware. Mm-hmm. So I, try and do a little bit of everything, but I mean, I was trained as a biologist. It's the thing I like doing. It tends to be the more exciting, interesting projects.
Yeah.
So yeah, I do a fair bit of that. A lot of and also just trying to make like synthetic biology accessible. It's hard for some people to read like a journal paper and then translate that into actually doing something with it. So I try and make it or like present a project in a way that people can understand it, and then ideally replicate it if they can. Although I do know that some of the projects are kind of outside of the realm that like your average person would be able to replicate it. Mm-hmm. We made a meat berry at one point. That one was really just to show how like mammalian cell culture works. It wasn't really so much that like I was expecting people to go out and make meat berries.
What is a meat berry?
It's a berry that you've removed all the cellular material from and then replaced it with mammalian cells.
Okay. All right. So how did you end up doing all of this biology outside of an academic setting?
I've been doing science kind of on my own and outside of academia since I was 14. Started with nuclear physics and then eventually drifted more towards biology. It was one of those things where you can buy all of the equipment and materials and reagents very readily available online. So I had a bit of training from doing it in university. Was very frustrated with the way that the academic track was kind of taking me. The school I was at didn't really have a synthetic biology stream, so I wasn't really learning the thing I wanted to learn. So I just started building myself a lab, bought all the equipment, the reagents, and just kind of started like bumbling my way through the procedures until I got good at it.
Cool. Okay. Yeah, I'm asking these questions because there might be people who are unfamiliar with synthetic biology in general, so at least you'll get an introduction through the practices of these three people. Okay, and then I'll go to Ananda. So Ananda, we've met at a DIY biology summit type of conference, I would say. Mm-hmm. You are, I don't really know how to introduce you. You're a food enthusiast. You've been for a while into like eating military rations and things like that, right? Yeah. And you're just a fascinating human interested in community around food, around biology, around hardware as well, right? You're involved with the global open science hardware community. So what are you doing now, and what did you do?
So right now I'm focusing more on public engagement. So right now I am starting to run a series of workshops in Toronto in the basement of a semi-abandoned mall in Chinatown called Pao Cai Bio. And it's like, what does community biology look like in the middle of Chinatown? And so we've done some classes on like traditional Chinese medicine and fermentation, and then now we're going to do a public health workshop on the coronavirus, and then micropropagation workshop with my friend who is an Asian farmer. She runs a small organic farm, but also studied plant sciences. So kind of seeing what biology looks like in the context of our near communities. And then right now I'm also doing public engagement through art. So there's going to be a bioart show at Sugar Contemporary on March 5th on the scales of bioprocessing from self-care to healthcare. So from like making like kombucha to pharmaceuticals. And we're having an interesting panel on that. And I also used to be part of iGEM in Toronto for human practices. And that was also really exciting. When I do get to do lab work, it's mostly when I'm visiting a lab in another city, where if it's like New York or the West Coast, and then I have protocols that I want to try out, and because usually these labs are pretty well stocked, it feels more like an arts and crafts session for me, which I really enjoy. Whereas when I try to do these things on my own, I don't really have the time or the money to usually build a lab from the ground up. So, yeah.
Cool. Okay. Also, can everyone hear each other? I would prefer it if we don't have to use a microphone, because that limits the people who wish to speak. So
we can. So either maybe we can get closer or use mics.
Yeah, if you could get closer. So otherwise, we have to hold around microphones, and I feel like maybe. All right. Okay. Thank you, Ananda. I hope that helps. So I'm hoping to get some perspective on community and also identity issues that I want to bring up here. Now we have Dr. Brandiff Caron. You are here from Concordia University, a lecturer at the Center for Engineering and Society. So what I've written down here is you research social responsibility of engineers, mainly, but you've also been involved with iGEM last year.
Yeah. I'm a member of the Center for Applied Synthetic Biology as well. I'm sort of the in-house ethicist. The Center for Engineering and Society is a pretty unique model in Canada. We're all social scientists, but we're embedded within the engineering and computer science faculty. And so we have different PhDs in different social sciences. Mine's in science and technology studies, philosophy of technology specialty. We have sociologists, historians, anthropologists. And so we take care of the core requirements for engineers to think about the social, ethical, legal implications of their work. We're increasingly getting involved in design processes. Mm-hmm. Too often these sorts of courses introduce engineers to a code of ethics that have nice sort of platitudes like hold paramount public health and safety, but don't have any really action guiding principles, like no way to apply this and to be able to say that we have done due diligence in terms of thinking about the potential negative and positive effects of technologies. So we've been increasingly thinking about how to democratize design processes, how to be more inclusive in design processes, how to bring in non-technical folks into technical design processes in the hopes that the design iterations that technologists go through and creating new and emerging technologies will themselves be more amenable to diverse needs and populations, the sort of Montreal has.
Okay, yeah, great. So today I'm hoping that a discussion would kind of lead to a new perspective on how we should think and communicate around synthetic biology. And maybe we can conclude that we're already doing that very well, maybe not. But yeah, the way I would like to do that is to think and reflect on the types of technologies we're developing now in synthetic biology. What are all the possibilities, basically, that we can do now in the field? What do we envision in the second part of the discussion? What do we envision in the next 50 years that is possible? And we can do that in type of a utopian thinking exercise. So think very idealistically, and then we're also going to critique those ideals. So, and then from there on, we'll boil down a couple of questions that we should be thinking of now that are maybe, we wouldn't have considered beforehand. So maybe, Brandiff, I wanted to ask you, do you consider the technologists you just discussed also synthetic biologists, and in what sense?
So the Center for Applied Synthetic Biology here at Concordia has two founding members. One's a biologist, the other's an engineer. And so synthetic biology, you get as many definitions of synbio as people you ask. But the idea that engineering is a central component is usually in there somewhere. So you're at least applying science. And sort of another word for engineering is applied science, right? Mm-hmm. And so, in 2003, we get the human genome fully mapped. We can read the book of life. Everyone's really excited, and now people are thinking about how to write the book of life and how to make edits and rewrite it. And when you start making things with the kind of science that comes out of the Human Genome Project, the CRISPR-Cas9 came less than 10 years after that. Stuff happened really, really fast. And once you start thinking about making things and designing things, I think you're in the area of engineering. So I think that's how the Center for Engineering and Society gets involved with that. Because then design thinking and all things I was talking about before start coming into play.
Cool. So that brings me, I wanted to bring up this case. So cells are material things. They can be grown in a dish, fed with nutrients, exposed to toxins, made to glow, and photographed and counted by means of sophisticated instruments available to modern science. But in the era of genomic medicine, cells are, more importantly, also libraries of information. So in certain places, such as the USA, a cell can be property from someone else. I can, donate my cells, or they can be taken for scientific research. But if a cell is not just a material, but also information, then how should we start thinking about that? Whereas if my information is taken, that isn't just my information, it's my genetic information, it's my genetic heritage even, and it's my identity. So if that can be property of someone, how should we start thinking about identity? And, if someone owns my genome, it owns it almost of my children and of my parents and of my family around it. So how should we deal with this moving forward? Yeah.
So, I mean, the most relevant case of this is I did 23andMe. And I still get the freaking emails of, you have new DNA relatives. I thought I turned that option off. Why are you? Why is this? Why do I keep getting these notifications? Who is seeing? I turned off sharing. Are other people still getting it? That's pretty weird. But then kind of in more of an applied sense, the thing I'm working on is synthetic spider silk. Most of the good spiders have been patented, which is sort of a weird concept because there's all sorts of laws where you're not supposed to be able to patent nature. And literally all they've done is they've taken the gene, stuck it in something else, and this is mine now. And this is a very weird, and personally I find it very frustrating. because it's taken something that could be very cool, it could be very useful, but now it's locked down by patents and you're not allowed to touch it anymore. And this is not just with spider silk, this happens all the time. One of the companies that you can buy like fluorescent protein DNA from, if you were to actually sequence the DNA that they give you, it's within 95% of a natural sequence. And yet, they've patented it and will sue the shit out of you if you try and do anything with it outside of their terms of service. They'd lose, but that would require fighting them, which is not a pleasant experience. It's very expensive, and so you'll lose because you can't pay for the lawyer, not because they're actually right. So this is a bit of a weird.
Yeah, and obviously there's like a lot of cases around this as well with human tissue and human immortal cell lines that are being made, like the famous HeLa case, for example. But also more recent cases where this happened, and still in the United States there is no specific law about this where you can just take tissue, it is material, right, and you can own that material and make money off of it. And then it's up to specific states to have rules about this. So this is like this weird space of law, patent law, and biology, and then even identity of, me. And I have a lot of problems thinking about that. Like, how can we make sure my heritage is even protected? Is there anyone who can comment on that?
Yeah, I think it does definitely pose interesting questions on ownership and even when you think of 23andMe, the information that it gives you, you have ownership to your own heritage as well and stuff, and with the HeLa cells derived from Henrietta Lacks, the ownership that her children have over her cells, right after she's passed. So I think it's I don't know, there's a lot of really interesting questions, especially because we live in a capitalistic society that's dictated by property, right? So it's you have to make really defined lines about what we own as I guess our personhood, I can say.
Yeah, your personhood. So the HeLa case is actually special because the NIH set out the rule that anyone who wants to access the HeLa genomic information now has to consult the family and has to ask for approval. But that's just the only case out there. And if we have to imagine we have to fight this, or maybe this is not a good way, I'm not sure, because now we have to fight this for every possible case out there, which, is almost impossible.
Also, just fun note, just because of the sheer availability of HeLa cells, I think that at some point somebody figured it out that there's technically more HeLa cells now than when Henrietta Lacks was alive, which is a bit weird.
Yeah.
But it's also the same with most cancer cell lines. Every single cancer cell line came from a person, and you don't consult with their family. You just buy it from ATCC.
Yeah. You
don't ask. There's no form. There's just here's your vial of very expensive cancer.
Yeah.
One of the labs I collaborate with, I think, has a dozen different cancer cell lines at the moment for testing various things. But it's a very weird concept. It's you just have access to this. I mean, the cells are very broken. As these things go, the reason they're still alive is because they're very, very broken.
Yes.
Well, it seems like you were saying, under capitalism, something isn't valuable unless it can be monetized. So I think that's where the fear comes in, because it starts to become how much are you worth?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I don't know about sort of the realms in which, or if not, people are compensated. Probably not. But I'm also thinking about what if there are partial licensing models when you're born, as weird and dystopic as that sounds. Just how with Creative Commons licensing, there's different tiers. I'm sort of now, as we're talking, just sort of imagining different models for someone's personhood.
Yeah. So I get born, my parents sequence me and then license my genome under whichever license they wish. Or they do a Creative Commons or
one that can be monetized. Yeah, like a following up of. Sorry. Sorry about that. I didn't mean to interrupt.
Okay. No way.
No,
Go
but,
ahead.
like, yeah, like if you were to create a giant library of information of like the human genome, which isn't that the Human Genome Project?
Yeah, so there is like
Yeah.
giant libraries available with all these genomes already.
Yes.
So for any cell line I would use in the lab, I actually have the genome available. Yeah, so I can access it usually because they are published, and then I just recognize the people who worked on that publication. I don't immediately recognize the human it came from, though.
Mhm.
And that's something I also don't think of as a scientist,
Mhm.
because for me it's just material, right?
Mhm.
It's not like I'm working with a person. To me, it's just a liquid. I, move from one dish to another. So you had a follow up.
Yeah, there's a foundation called the BioBricks Foundation. And one of the things they do is gobble up as many patentable things they can, and then copyleft them, make them available for everyone. With the whole Creative Commons sort of copylefting idea that anybody can use it except for blood-sucking capitalists, right? You can only use them for certain purposes. This is an international organization that has millions of dollars flowing through it, and they do other things as well. They're one of the leaders in trying to think about international regulations and self-regulatory frameworks for synbio and ethics. But one of the main things that they do in terms of the millions of dollars that flow through it is collect things like this from researchers at universities and private organizations that are willing to either sell or just provide things that then they copy themselves. BioBricks Foundation. I'm not a member, I'm just a fan.
So can I just ask a follow-up question? So then they collect all of this information and they put it where?
Good.
Yeah.
Okay, so the way this typically works is if something is public knowledge, it can't be patented. So as soon as, like, if you can get your hands on it
Mhm.
and just make all of the information public, it is literally impossible to patent it, because the first step of getting a patent is this public knowledge? If the answer is yes, you no patent for you.
Okay.
I've gone through the patent process once. It's awful. Wouldn't suggest anybody do so. But that was one of the things the lawyer was talking to me. He's like, has anyone done this? Like, the first step is always dig through as much literature as you can, see if you can find that thing. If it doesn't exist, then you can get the patent. But
But what you're saying is that it doesn't exist, like this cell material,
so
or
it
someone's-
would depend.
if it's been patented.
Yes. So specific example. There is a pair of genes that if you put the right promoter on them and put them into plants, they make plants grow twice the size in half the time. There is a paper on this, but there's no gene sequences available in that paper. They talk about the genes. They don't give you any way of actually finding those genes. But if you search, there's a patent on them, owned by the logging industry.
Oh.
So you can talk about the thing existing, you just can't give the specifics. And you can talk about how it works, you just can't give the specifics. As soon as that gene sequence is public, it's useless for patents.
I guess that just goes back to the question of what's public and what's not.
Yes.
I'm just meaning a theoretical sense. Like, I understand posting something on the internet, right? But like these genes have existed. They're not things that scientists, like synthetic biologists, no matter how like we can boast ourselves, you can create these genes, and you have these biotech companies patenting, like what right do they fundamentally
Yeah.
have to do that, right? If it already exists. Right?
Yeah.
It's not something that they built. It's not something that was like constructed. Why do they have
But I'm so sorry. But it's when we talk about synthetic biology, right? That's what interested me today to actually come here, because I'm in the digital realm. So when you talk about something that's created online, what is that? Well, there's definitely an ecosystem developing. There's definitely some kind of biology being created, but how real is it? So going back to what you said.
So I think the question here is like, is my genomic information, does it exist
Yes.
now, just sitting here, or does it only become to existence if it's sequenced? and out there in forms of ATCG, right? And if that's the case, then we can discuss, maybe it already existed, it is out there. So if you're born,
Public. Yeah.
it's
Public.
it's
knowledge.
public.
I don't think it should be public.
Oh, it should be
when-
private.
It should be private when you are born. Maybe when you reach a certain age, maybe when you turn 21 or 25, then you can
It'll be
decide.
it'll be like cigarettes.
But I think it can really change a person's life if their parents like share their genomic information, and there might be, I don't know, there might be something like wrong with their child, and they might face discrimination throughout their life
Yeah.
or prejudice even before they have a chance to deal with it, even before they're walking and talking. So I just, I don't know.
I mean, like anytime a kid is born through some new like in vitro
Yes.
procedure, they make the news. Like this kid, like just wants to be a kid, wants to grow up, wants to be ignored, is fundamentally a thing of study for their entire lives, and they can't avoid it. Their existence is because some person in a lab made that happen. So it very quickly gets very weird. And then then you get into the like the sort of like more like archaeological stuff, where it's like if somebody's been dead long enough, you dig them up and sequence them. I mean, they're dead. They have no say in what you do with their DNA. If they had some weird mutation you can use somehow, like.
Maybe it should be sort of like when certain songs or media become public because they've been around for so long. It's like if you carbon date a body, if they're certain whatever thousands of years old or hundreds of years old, then you can sequence it. I don't know.
Yes, but
Weird
like,
guess.
who are we to decide, or like, is it a government to decide on this? And like, if so, then maybe I'm from the U.S. and decide to go to China and dig up a body there, and
It's a whole other messed up history.
Yeah. So I have an interesting case that I wanted to read, if I can find it. Yes. So two French families, the Ménessons and the Labassis, tested the unsettled jurisdictional waters when they chose to have children in California through IVF, taking advantage of that state's liberal environment for surrogacy. So they have an in vitro fertilized child through surrogacy in California. So France initially denied citizenship to their daughters, who by birth were entitled to the US citizenship. In June 2014, the European Court of Human Rights ruled that France was obliged to grant citizenship to both families' children because they would otherwise grow up with diminished identities and rights vis-a-vis other children of French parents. So the ECHR saw this as a violation of Article 8 of the European Convention on Human Rights, granting children the right to respect for private and family life. And so France was okay with this and let this case go. This is,
The kids also get U.S. citizenship?
Yes.
Oh, so they got both?
Yes.
Okay.
Win.
Win. But so this is what happens when, different countries or places in the world have different rules on biology. And here it gets really weird when we're talking about IVF and surrogacy. And then if you would, bump in the factor of being able to gene edit those children as well, like where are we heading to?
I mean, to be fair, when it comes to Europe and anything that involves so much as a pipette, they're living in the frickin' Stone Age. Like if you want to put green fluorescent protein in a bacteria in anywhere in Europe, you need a license. Your lab needs a license. And there's about a stack of paperwork about yay high and thousands upon thousands upon thousands of dollars that you need to submit to the various governments to be allowed to do so. And it's like, this is kind of ridiculous. They've now added any sort of mutagenesis now counts as genetic modification, so anything that was mutated to make their crops is now also a GMO and regulated. So, does that get weird? And then you mix in the human component of literally in that case where like you do anything, and the government goes
So will we have something like genetic immigration, or maybe people moving to certain places on the earth because you can edit your children?
Probably.
I feel like some people or some countries would definitely do that sooner than others.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you go to China to get organs.
Yeah, maybe it's already the case, kind of, in some way, right? If you
Especially
think
for
about-
medical tourism.
Yeah.
And like gene therapies.
Yeah. Yeah.
50% of the Guatemalan capital is medical tourism. It's like the entire city. And the amount of like weird, crazy things that you can get done there is just mind-blowing. So yeah, no, that's a thing already.
Yeah.
It's totally a thing.
Do you think this in vitro birth situation could be categorized under medical tourism?
Oh yeah, I mean in that case
It
was.
is already.
It was.
Okay.
I went to California.
Yeah.
Got it done. Went back to France.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, it does. Oh, I just can't think of it as that because it's just like.
Right? Yeah, it's
Yeah.
weird. So, to me personally, maybe this shouldn't fall under that category of medical tourism. That makes me really feel really weird. As in, like, I go to another country to have, I don't know, modified children or something like that, or a world where that would be a possibility. I don't think it could be a possibility. Just thinking of all the legal issues following that, right? So many people trying to move back and having to.
I would say it's the opposite. I can't see a world where that wouldn't
Wouldn't
be a
be,
possibility.
yeah.
I mean, technically, I am one of the first genetically modified humans. I did it to myself, but it was not hard. Like you can buy the materials on like the normal, not even like the dark web, the normal internet, like above board companies will sell you all of the materials that you need to do this. If there were more interesting mods, people would be doing this probably all the time. I mean, so posted a video about this. Whew. Have I seen a lot of people who are like, sign me up, when can I get in on this? I'm like, guys, we need more testing. Let's not, but no, people would, like if this was readily available, people would be moving in droves to be able to do this.
So how can we have future society think about this as a matter of like, if you're editing your genome or the one of your children, you know, it's not your right maybe as a parent to do that. And even for yourself, if you're, well, because then you're changing your gene line, I guess. So,
It's the same with IVF.
or is it your right?
That would also be.
Mm-hmm. Go ahead.
I did this different. Like, somebody trying to have children versus genetically modifying children.
But genetically they
before
can't.
They exist without their consent. Like the whole other playing, right? Like I think like I don't know. I think like it's very important to maybe make those kind of distinctions, like IVF versus genetic modification. I understand there's a wide, like gene editing is very wide branch, and the technology isn't even really up to par to actually do any type of genetic modification in the world. But like IVF,
I guess it is. It's not hard.
IVF is like, I think it's like, the technology itself is just doing what humans do but outside of the body in the exact kind of the same way. And I understand there's a lot of manipulations of hormones or whatever, but allowing people to have children versus like modifying those children is like they're on different scales. Like I understand there are similar concepts of like technology changing how we fertilize and grow children, but the impact that it has on those kids is like
What about the
potential impact.
What about the 3-parent children?
Like
There's nothing natural about that. That is entirely synthetic. There's
So can you explain the
so
case?
the 3-parent children concept is basically usually it's the mother's mitochondria are for some reason incompatible with making a new person. So you need to get mitochondria from a third person, put it into the egg, then fertilize it, and then implant it. So this is a very, like at this point there is, like in my personal view, I would see this as, that it's entirely synthetic. Like the difference between doing that and tweaking a gene, or changing one little thing. It's harder to do the mitochondria transfer, frankly. Like tweaking one gene or 2 genes trivial.
I don't think it's trivial. I think that's kind of misleading as to like what the literature and the technology is. I understand like the mitochondrial implanting was, or the tri-parenting thing was very cool, and I think it was definitely a huge feat and stuff. But like I think you're right, I guess, in the sense of like IVF and what I was referring to before. But like when I mean by genetic modifications, and like I think I'm kind of just thinking of designer babies mostly. I don't know, like if this kid would be considered a designer baby, maybe I guess. I was thinking more along the lines of Gattaca. But like the gene editing itself, like it's really not there yet. Like changing the DNA from the embryo level, I don't think we've really been actively doing it as much as we're doing it now. But like to say that it's working to then have like maybe a kid right now, that's a little bit of a jump.
A, it's been done. B, it's very easy. It's literally like you design the piece of DNA, you choose how you want to make the mod, either through CRISPR or through one of the many other similar systems. If you actually want to like go in and tweak a specific gene, take egg, make the like modification solution, which is literally like you buy one reagent from Thermo, mix it with the DNA, sploop it onto the egg, you're done.
Yeah, but there's a designer baby out here, like outside of like in the context we're talking about.
So it's also a sliding scale, right? Like designer baby to the point of like, and then it's taller and smarter and faster, whatever. Like we're far from that. But say changing one gene to make you more resistant to HIV, very easy, and has been done. That was what made the news. That's what, I don't remember the last name, He Jianku, I think.
Yeah.
Did that to a pair of twins and then a third kid.
And then got pushed into jail.
And then got thrown into jail, which is
3-year prison sentence.
Yeah, 3-year prison sentence for it. But it has been done.
All right, let's go. Is that a new topic?
Oh, is it 2 minutes?
Follow.
Oh,
It's okay.
then
Follow up.
I think where we're heading is this sort of obvious slope where, like, first, we can, like, the ethical question is like, oh, can I modify my kids so that they don't have like a medical disorder that I'm predisposed to, let's say, or do like surrogacy things, the same sort of thing where like I want to avoid having mitochondria that are bad, so I can do this like use the technology. I can do the same kind of concept of gene editing, and then my kid doesn't have this disease that I'm carrying, right? And that's kind of obviously the entry point for a lot of other gene editing that can happen. And then the question is like, where do you draw that line between like what you're allowed to edit or not allowed to edit, and when gene editing is more popular, more feasible to address these kinds of conditions, and that's where I feel like things get focused. So maybe we're established that like yes, gene editing will kind of have a lot of stuff going on with healthcare, with having like healthier kids or whatever, and then the ethical line where like okay. On one hand, like genetic disorders can be eradicated, which is quite nice. Like that'd be great, no more genetic disorders ever in humanity. But then, if let's say I live in a society where my kid is smart enough, then they can't get a job and end up on the streets or whatever, then should I be allowed to engineer my kid to be smart enough to be guaranteed to excel in society or something like that? Then my brain gets more.
So I feel like these types of questions are thought of a lot already in our field and are always a topic being brought up. So I'm not sure. I think you were first.
But so there's a distinction made in philosophical ethics, ethicists that are trying to sort this stuff out, and that's between trying to fill conceptual vacuums or policy vacuums. And then applying ethics. And part of the problem is that, but I really like your case, jumping to what's the ethical thing to do here, was France right to have recognized it or not, is actually jumping the gun a bit, because part of what's happening here is our categories are getting messed up. What constitutes the mother in that situation, right? The definition of motherhood now
That's a conceptual thing, which isn't really. It has ethical ramifications how you come down on it, but itself is something that we kind of have to work out first, by doing some conceptual clarity. And after we do that, then we can start asking, okay, so how do our ethics, how do our moral values apply to this particular case? This is something that happens in emerging technologies, like as a rule. And so, like, computer ethics is famous for this. Software piracy is that theft. Like, we had to sort out exactly what's going on there, because when you copy something, you're not depriving the original owner of anything, which is usually the wrong-making feature of theft to begin with. And so we had to figure out what exactly, we had to redefine theft. We had to rethink the actual conceptual clarity, the conceptual category that we're using here. And then we can say, okay, so now what's the ethical framework that ought to be in place?
Can I just quickly follow up, because I think where I go from there kind of shoots back this way to, okay, because you have the material thing, you have the actual cells, you have the actual genome, right? You have that, right? Yep. But then when we get into extraction and documentation and information, it becomes conceptual, and then who do those concepts belong to?
You've said this a couple times now. I don't think there's physical objects here.
That's where I want it.
Information, right?
Okay, but it reflects the actual person. So if I take sorry to go back to this, but this seems to be like the very root of it is like the personhood of a person, or because you can take that out of everything a person does, everything, the action that happens out of us as human beings. That's information as well, but it's caused by something real in the world, which is ultimately these cells or something.
I think a good analogy might be like taking a picture of somebody and then wondering if they
Yes.
have rights to their image.
Exactly.
That's probably a better way of thinking about it, because you can write down the entire sequence of somebody. It has nothing to do anymore with their physical
They have no ownership over it.
Well, then there's where the question comes in. It doesn't mean like it has to be directly attached. So that sequence now is floating around. It can be on a computer. It's not attached anymore to the person the same way sort of a picture is. Right?
Okay. All right. So maybe we can. Was there? Oh yeah. Sorry.
This brings to mind, like, how did the United Nations form? Because if, let's say, there's some policy about this in North America, but that then somebody can go to another country. Is there some kind of international ethics board that could be created, or does something like that already exist? I have no idea. And even if that was to be created, how would that come about? And like,
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah, there is definitely like international consortia about biology, but most of the time it's like when something like this happens, like this case, or when something bad happens, then people get together and fix it. But I think in general, at least from what I've seen, a lot of the policy and the ethical thinking already happens within the science. And I guess I experienced that partially by like setting up this space, for example, where I was thinking a lot about, I'm bringing in biological materials here. I have to think about this. And for the people here, it was just like, why can't you just come in and bring this thing here? So a lot of this like policy and ethical thinking already happens in the science, I would state. And therefore, if something happens that we cannot predict, like, people moving countries for gene editing or something, then I feel like there is already, work that has been done. Maybe it can be done better or structured in some way.
So just real quick, so the World Health Organization has a new commission devoted entirely to this, which they only put together after the guy in China, ate the baby. But they seem to actually have real international authority. But there's in the very beginning, early phases of trying to get interested parties to committing to various regulatory frameworks. But the WHO, I think, has probably been the main place to go. There's a guy named Jamie Metzel, M-E-T-Z-L, wrote a book called Hacking Darwin, which is an awesome book, but he's on the World Health Organization Commission as well. They just started. I think they were just commissioned in November, this past November. So.
Did it just created one?
Yeah.
The World Health Organization?
Well, the synthetic biology, the World Health Organization Commission for synthetic biology regulatory frameworks. Yeah.
So, okay, I want to leave the designer baby
Yeah,
concept.
I just quickly, I think it's also going to come down to enforcement.
Yeah.
Like there's functionally, like you make as many commissions, as many international commissions as you want. Most countries on Earth don't get along, like especially the ones with nukes. So getting them to agree on anything, not to mention like something where they all have differing opinions on this, is functionally impossible. So there's like you can make as many, like you can set up whatever commission you want. There will always be the ability to go somewhere else to do the thing.
Yeah. All right. Okay. One last one.
So would the dystopian view be that this is just gonna happen, like no matter what, like you can't control it because it's available and it's happening, so it's gonna happen, just the way like the digital age happened, and only later people started to yell like, privacy, because in the beginning it was like, oh yeah, who cares about my privacy, and then only after people's privacy was so exploited, people started to demand, yeah, and now I want my privacy. So it's that same kind of pattern that's gonna happen.
It's both. Just coming back to something that Justin said, which I think didn't get elaborated on too closely, is that if I take the example of genetic disorders where there's one mutation, you can do that quite easily, not too difficult. People are starting to do that in at the pharmaceutical level today, but if you wanted to do something like change eye color or hair color or height or weight or whatever else, like those things get determined by so many different factors that you get into, you don't really know how to create a designer baby twin, because there isn't enough known about how the genes actually all work together and how the environment is also part of that whole story, that you can't just make a kid that runs faster because you want to. There's research there about what makes a kid run faster, genetically speaking, that we don't sort of know. So in that sense, like, yes, we'll start to see this stuff come up, but it might still be some time until like really that gets figured out as far as like how to do the design, and if it ends up being maybe 200 genes get modified in one cell in one baby to actually make it run faster, then that becomes another technical challenge. So not as quick as digital stuff. Suddenly everybody has a phone,
Okay. So maybe we can leave the designer babies aside now and go back kind of what we're doing now in the lab, which is designing organisms, bacteria, microorganisms to produce materials or have a specific function and all of that. I was just interested in seeing, well, if I ask someone on the street, what is synthetic biology, this is not necessarily what they think about. And I'm always wondering, like, how can we develop that thought into, I don't know, maybe something positive, right? Whereas if you would say biotech, maybe they think about medicine and pharmaceuticals and like this terrible industry, or if you say GMOs, it's obviously, you think about Monsanto and all of that. So if we say synbio, can we let them think about the glowing alarm clock on their bedside table or things like that?
I have this fantasy coming from like a food background perspective of having a craft brewery, except it's all like synthetic biology, and they're making flavors and not beer. And the general public can just come in, and maybe it's also a restaurant, and they use some of those flavors for some of their food processing.
Yeah.
And I think like a lot of people, having worked in a brewery before, a lot of people go to a brewery but not necessarily realize what's actually happening in the fermentation rooms. And essentially, like, if we could bring sort of synthetic biology into that context, I think it would be more accepted by the general public, especially if you elaborate on how most of the flavors that we've experienced in our life are made by a handful of companies, and that there's so many more possibilities for culinary experiences. And,
Yeah.
and convincing people of food is like pretty easy.
That blue is not a flavor.
Yeah.
So there's this book I love called Walk Away, and it wasn't even like a main facet of the book. It was one of those things that just kind of like gets mentioned, and I was just like, that's really cool. So it was basically the way it was put forward was it was like this gob of bacteria that if you feed it the right like light signals, it changes the like texture and taste to match whatever it is that you want. And like something like this, just like, oh, that's so cool. I want that so bad. I wish that people were more comfortable with like genetically modified foods. The problem, of course, is that people who don't know their ass from a hole in the ground have sold people on the idea that GMOs are bad, when it's like, but except that they're feeding more of the world, and you can do fantastic, wonderful things with them. It's one of the reasons why I love making genetically modified beer. So I mean, the classic is just like green fluorescent, but I just picked up 2 pieces of DNA that I think are going to be really fun, and I'm working on a third. The first one does beta-carotene synthesis in yeast, so it should yield a vibrant orange beer.
We
Plus,
have a plate there with beta-carotene.
Really?
Don't steal it.
Take a little swab. So there's that, there was the golden rice thing, which a bunch of people made a fuss about it, when it's like, this could be a really useful, fantastic thing where you can get vitamin A to people who are otherwise incapable of getting the right amount of vitamin A, all just through a staple that they're going to eat anyway.
Mm-hmm.
Beer is even easier for this. Everybody drinks beer. Like, it is pervasive throughout the entire planet.
And throughout history.
It's like, the reason beer exists is because for most of human history, if you drank the water, you die.
The reason we exist is beer.
Beer and milk is both exist because drinking the water is death. So if you can pitch somebody or like you can get, say, like a carotene yeast into the hands of regular people, that could be a really great way of both introducing synthetic biology and also like one-to-one instant health benefits.
Also, not synthetic biology, but the brewery that I was working in, we bought a couple strains of yeast from Bootleg Biology that cultured yeast from insects.
Oh.
And people seemed really sold and really interested on this idea, even though they were like wild strains. And I think like even just by explaining, if you were to like have some sort of synthetic biology brewery, just explaining kind of what the compound or whatever you're producing is, it's not so much more off than like, I had beer made from yeast from insects. I don't know, it's not as odd.
Lancia?
Okay, one thing along, but
Oh.
I think like what I like, you guys are both working with beer and in breweries, and then like talking about like brewing and house parties culture for a long time, and because it's accessible and it's democratic and it's something that people are comfortable with, whereas like gene editing and like designer babies like not accessible. So it's like this entry point that I'm fascinated with, that I find it interesting that both of you work in kind of that same place.
Yeah, so I want to follow up on that here. So I was thinking, does this have to do with the fact that we used to all be so much closer to our food, to making our, growing our own plants, and then this is now kind of a bit lost, and maybe this, this is a way of bringing biology back to the people, and this is why this could be a powerful method of, shining a bright light on synbio.
Yeah, I think you guys have nailed it. And I think you nailed it when you introduced our new topic, when you talked about Monsanto and GMOs. There's decades worth of social scientific research around why people have a lack of trust and faith in genetic modified foods. And it shows pretty clearly that it's not from an ignorance of the actual science or a false belief in the potentially negative health effects of consuming the foods, but because of the market framework through which they get developed, marketed, and made available. So people don't necessarily not trust GMOs, they don't trust Monsanto. And for well-documented, legitimate reasons here. What you guys are describing, and I think Lancia, or you used the word democratic. This is, when synthetic biologists are like, oh, we need to get the word out so people will like synbio more, they should trust us, right? No, they shouldn't. They shouldn't. The history, and especially recent history, has shown us that they absolutely shouldn't. If you're going to replicate the market frameworks that other emerging sciences have, and so far synbio does seem to be going down that pathway, then they have no reason at all to trust you. Now, if you're interested in alternative economic frameworks of the sort discussed in Cory Doctorow's of the sort that the BioBricks Foundation, I swear I don't work for them, the BioBricks Foundation is pushing for, doing DIYs in bio, bringing science to the people, bringing people to the science,
and doing it in a way that's transparent and not black boxed in the way that capitalist market frameworks require that it be, then you'll have a much better time getting people to trust you, because they won't be trusting you. They'll be a part of it.
Yes.
They'll be participating. They'll be empowered to be a part of it.
Sure.
I mean, this is one of the reasons why I love YouTube, because and it is by far the most watched video platform on Earth at the moment. Like, there's a reason TV has died. But what's really great about it is that anybody can get access to it, and if you present the information properly, instead of people going, "Wow, this is horrifying," "Oh God, GMOs," they're like, "Oh, this makes sense." Like, because with something like Monsanto, like they release the product after however many years of researching and developing and testing and all this stuff, and you see the end product. You don't see the whole process. You don't see the actual like normal ass humans who did the work and did like the things that Monsanto makes. Personally, I think are pretty great. Because of the crops that they've developed, we're now using pesticides which are way less horrifying than the ones we used to be using. We're using less of the pesticides that we used to. Like BT crops are fantastic, because then we don't need to be spraying anything. The crop is just naturally resistant to the insects.
Do you work on that?
I don't. I'm just a fan. No. And they actually fund an enormous amount of plant research. But being able to show like average people working on this instead of some big scary company, I think will do a lot. And also on the topic of like beer, like fermentation is kind of at the heart of every culture. Every single culture has a huge array of fermented things that they make, be it soy sauce or miso or sauerkraut or kombucha or whatever the thing is. Like, even people who are like, no, I don't like fermented food. I'm like, no, you do. You just don't know how many things are fermented. So in the context of taking these traditional like fermenty things and then being able to add that like synbiotic spin to it, I think is really interesting. Yeast is obviously great because you've got beer and bread and all the other wonderful things you can make with yeast. But there's hundreds of other organisms that you can work with and do all kinds of weird, interesting things to. Like if you're like really into cooking, you got to learn how to use koji. Koji is wonderful. It is the secret to good food. But like if you could like take koji and make it taste like lemons or whatever the thing it is that you wanted to do, that could be really interesting. And it would be a great way of getting people like instantly into this thing. They could, and especially it becomes very shareable. Especially like in the same way that like data is shared very easily. Like sharing yeast takes no effort. Like you can just put it on a piece of paper, mail it through the mail.
Chris, give the word to you.
Like I wanted to jump in earlier, but your BT example makes it easier for me. Like with the political, ethical stakes that non-Western countries and situations, societies where there's a power asymmetry have are completely different. So for instance, it's the whole chain of BT crops and then they have to go for specific pesticide that has led to suicide of millions of farmers in India. So the experience with BT and Monsanto has definitely not been good. Similar experiences with GMO, and there are a lot of other real ground experience from countries like India and other places. While we can keep on discussing what is possible within science and how there is a kind of transparency and democratic decision making possible design which could be more participatory and all. I think this barrier of expertise and non-expertise, and I work on nuclear issues and there also we face this. Like the whole decision making gets circumscribed by this clique of experts, and then we have seen situations where where democracy is already not so transparent, the entire decision making is hijacked in favor of corporations and vested interests. Yeah.
So I have a question for everyone else. What does sort of like a participatory process look like in designing a new organism?
Well, I think that's why I keep going back to the genes. Is like, what do you mean by new?
It's
Because
like,
how do we create a new organism?
so I'm thinking about it in the context of product design. So yes, the raw materials do exist, but what does the final product, the final form look like with various opinions and stakeholders involved?
So you're talking about the process.
Yeah.
So this is my main area of research. There's a literature. I'm going to try not to sound like a nerdy professor, but there is a literature called the Social Construction of Technology, or SCOT. And what that literature does is identify places where political values, moral values become embedded within technologies as they're becoming designed, usually around the leverage points or points where design decisions get made and choose to do one thing instead of another. And there's ways of sort of reverse engineering that design process to open up those points during the iterations that go into design, to ask questions about why one decision is being made instead of another. Like typically it's going to be, well, it's less expensive or more easily sourced or something like that, but it's easy to add onto questions like that issues of what potential effects might this have on indigenous peoples or something. And there are a whole bunch of different ways for participatory design mechanisms to work. Last year with the iGEM team here, we used something called real-time technology assessment, which asked them to go through a 4-part process of thinking about various ways in which their design processes might have been made differently given new types of information. Some of them actually call for deliberative or citizens panels or deliberative conferences of various sorts where you literally do bring people in off the street. And there's ways to do it more systematically through applying representative models in political science to make sure you have a representative sample of the community that you're working within. And there's some preliminary work done to show that designs, like the technology themselves, the prototypes that end up as a result of having this more inclusive design process are very different than processes that don't include them. I mean, you can't foresee all potential possibilities, but oftentimes it's just a lack of diversity in design teams that account for like the fact that Black people's faces aren't recognized by, I think, upwards to 80% of facial recognition software. Right?
Yeah.
That's just a problem of lack of diversity in design for software.
So I want to go back to that question, but first I want to continue on that. Like, since we see such problems with artificial intelligence, which in some cases you could call life even in the future, like, how do you think we'll be dealing with designer cells that could be racist or things like that? Who knows?
No. I think that's behavioral. I think that's definitely.
Well, a cell can make a decision. We can design cells to make decisions. So in the future, we can have cells that compute.
Okay.
So if we have cells that compute, then they can make decisions and they contain artificial neural networks. And they can learn from anything around their environment. Like, can they have bias?
I mean, just from like a technological standpoint,
Yes.
I have many issues with this. Whenever I talk about biology, I tend to talk about it in the sense of it's the closest thing to alien technology we have, not in the sense that aliens made it, but in the sense that we didn't. So all of our genetic engineering tools are basically stolen from bacteria. I mean, that's what CRISPR is. It's what all of these things are. Every enzyme that we use has been taken from some organism. You mentioned, like, what is new? Almost nothing.
Exactly.
We cannot make new proteins.
Yes.
We don't know how.
Yeah.
It doesn't exist. Like, you can take a protein and mutate the hell out of it to change its properties, but you can't make something new yet. At all.
But like,
Possibly
what in
ever.
50 years, we're advancing
yes, what if-
artificial cells, artificial
but in-
membranes.
I would say that's such a jump in technology that it's almost not worth talking about yet. Just in the sense that we don't even know if that's actually possible. Like, DNA computing is very interesting, but also very rudimentary. The idea that also an individual cell is super dumb. just fundamentally like it can do its one job very, very well, but getting it to like do all kinds of different things all at the same time and do all this computation, like there's a reason brains are a thing. Like you need lots and lots and lots and lots of cells to be able to do large scale.
But distributed computing in cells is a thing already.
Yeah.
So, I don't know. We'll
but
see
it's
where
still
it
not
goes.
one cell. It's still like a gob of cells.
Yes.
Could our biases be built in? Yeah, maybe. That would be but like you'd have to go out of your way to do it. Like it's not. I don't think it's something that you could do by accident necessarily. Like with AI, or even just through like with genetic research. Like the reason that it vastly favors white people is because that's the databases we have. Like with genetic databases, like with 23andMe, huge amounts of their data is from white people. So this massively skews things, which is an obvious problem. But trying to get like a cell to be racist with like, you'd have to build in like a melanin receptor or something and like,
Well, I don't know what
it'd be
type of
real weird.
decisions cells will make in the future, or what
Right.
type of decisions genetic information will make.
Right.
I don't know. Maybe we can think of something like that.
It'd be hard.
Yeah, no clue. I think Kevin and then you.
No, I
You
was
first.
I think like just to answer your first question, like what the design process would look like. I think the iGEM teams are amazing things. Like being part of iGEM myself back in Waterloo, like constantly thinking about like the impact of your project, asking people what their thoughts are and everything. Like I think like the way iGEM is set up, I think it's created a foundation for like everyone who goes through that process in terms of synthetic biology to think of these things, to create these type of panels or discussion tables, you know. And I think that's how we like get to that point and get what we call the learning process. But like with your question on what our technologies could do, I think like sometimes like thinking about like the cell could be racist. It's like it's so far off into nature, and I think that's where a lot of people's fears when it comes to synthetic biology, biotechnology, and where they come from. Like there's a lot of things that we could maybe do in the future, but like it's so far off. But it does pose a question around the biases of our work, right? We talked about BT crop and how it's great, but how its impact on the third world, right? Like our biases, I disagree that we have to really push to see the biases in our product. I think we have to do the opposite. I think we have to really push to make sure our biases are not there, right? And all the technologies that we develop and things about. I think that like, again, not only do we live in a capitalistic society, we live in a white supremacist, racist, misogynistic, etc., etc., etc. So that will show in our work. Even conversations around design agreements, right? Disabled peoples and people who fight around disability justice have been really offended around the conversations that have been having about what does it mean? Do they deserve to live? Do they deserve to exist the way they do? So like, we do have to have those conversations about our biases and what they are, and the impacts of what they'll have. But so again, iGEM, outreach, human practices, I kind of like the conversations that we're thinking about. I think in ways that both biotechnologists work through it, you know, and the current pharmaceutical framework, you know, but like it's I think we're moving in a really great direction.
I think so too. I think Kevin was curious.
Oh, I have something like this.
Oh, okay.
I guess from us.
Is there a follow up on this?
Just real quick. I mean, the fact that these structures already existed, I think, doesn't necessarily make it somehow categorically different from other forms of technologies that I think most of us are ready to accept have bias that could potentially be racist. I mean, like, this isn't made out of angel's hair and baby's breath, right? This is nothing is made new in that sense. So every time we manipulate the kind of world, we're doing so for purposes, for reasons. So the artifacts themselves, the cells themselves might be neutral artifacts. As soon as you start doing anything with them, you're doing something with them for a particular reason, with a set of intentions and a desired outcome. And these are the sorts of things that are absolutely normative. They're not all
bad, right? It can be good or bad, but the kind of thing that can be good or bad. And so one of the first things we do in our engineering ethics course is just to talk about technology as more than just a mere artifact. The technology is doing something. It's using an artifact for a particular purpose. And you can find racism there. You're not always going to, hopefully, but you can find normativity there, I guess I should say, right? It's the kind of thing, technology itself, by definition really, is the kind of thing that is normative, that can be good or bad. So I'm not sure that it's completely inappropriate to talk about racist cells yet. It depends on how you're using it.
Yeah.
I'm just thinking. Well, I was thinking that emphasizes the diversity piece, I guess, of the design and the participatory, the necessity to have a participatory design process that doesn't favor, there's this a sort of, I guess, an essence of neutrality somewhere, or a commitment to neutrality or unbiased. Because I'm a journalist, we talk about being unbiased, but if you have any journalist that's worth their weight, they're going to say that doesn't exist. We're all biased. So we stop operating under the illusion of there being no bias.
Fake news.
And we start, I'm sorry?
I said fake news.
Well, exactly. I mean, this is why I'm here. But if you get outside of that and you operate under the truth that there is bias everywhere, we live in these societies, then you move from there. What does that look like?
Mm-hmm. Let's bring up the last topic and then we'll close it.
So one of the things, having spent time with this kind of discussion for the past 6 years or so, whatever, in and out of different conversations on this, I've never heard any points brought up about like historic cases of this kind of thing. Because I mean, the concept isn't new. Where it's like, oh look, we have a new technology.
Mm-hmm.
Like, are people afraid of it or not? Like nuclear maybe was the last big thing where, of course, there's huge, polarizations around nuclear technology. Even the word electronics is now kind of like a normal word, or the word digital is like a normal word, except that there's probably some time in history where people were afraid of electronics, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know how it's just time that gets through, and then these conversations are meaningless almost too. Let's keep talking about it for a while, and eventually we forget. It's a complicated topic, and then or what might we be dealing with here.
The phrase for that is normalization through exposure. It's like any time people are like, well, what about this, and how are we going to feel about this? And like, it's normalization through exposure. The more we talk about it, the more present it becomes. Eventually, you're just numb to it, and it's not like when electricity was first a thing. People were like, oh God, it's gonna kill me. There's wires near me. It's affecting me. It's like it's just wires. So I feel like a lot of that is going to come down to probably just normalization through exposure. The more it happens, the more people do it. Eventually, you're just numb. I mean, you can't make it through a news site. Like if you read any bit of news from today, if you read that 6 years ago, you're like, this is insane.
They
now
predicted
we're like,
that though.
right.
They predicted this.
Right, but now it's like, it's a Tuesday. Like there's like.
Yeah. Well, the president of the United States broke the law. He went against the Constitution, and he's still the president.
Repeatedly, and then bragged about it.
Yes.
And it's fine.
And it's fine. He's still president.
Right.
Right.
I just got sidetracked thinking about the tunnel for control. One of the ways
2020.
One of the ways people are, I think, excited, one of the reasons people are really excited about synthetic biology is that it's kind of an emerging discipline now. So it's sort of coming into its own out of the genesis of biology, biochemistry, and engineering, and things like that. And it's the birth of a new field of study, a birth of a new discipline. Like SynBio as a field of study with its own conferences and things like that is not even 10 years old. And so this is a moment, and philosophers like to call it a constitutional moment, a moment where we can reflect on and actively engage with how the field comes together and how it coalesces into its own thing. So if you just Google right now, woman in SynBio, the first 5 hits you're going to get is going to talk about this.
because we're aware now of so many things, we're aware of technology as an extension of politics, how both politics affects the design of technology, but also how technologies can create new possibilities, both liberating and oppressive. We're more aware of this than we were when, like, we were arguing about nuclear power, even when, like, the digital revolution happened and things like this. And so there's this possibility now for people to consciously and reflectively engage in how the field comes together and how it coalesced. And so with, like, the gender issue, the idea is that because we know there is a lack of equitable representation of different types of people in other areas of STEM, let's, as we're putting this field together, take this into account consciously and make it the kind of field we want it, that we know it ought to be, and that it can be. This is an opportunity you don't get in, like, physics, in other disciplines. They're entrenched and locked into these old patterns that we know to be problematic.
Cool.
And also, screw Donald Trump.
Okay. Right, you can close the discussion when you're talking.
I wanted to get back to, I know it mentioned earlier about patenting our own, like, genomes and all that. So I'm just wondering if that is like a privacy thing that each person can really just own their own information, or is that just inevitable? It's inevitable that it's gonna get out if it exists, or is it it's already too late because when people die, what happens to their information? And also, if somebody goes through an operation, what happens to their information? Because if you or anyone you know had an operation and you had an organ removed, let's say it could be a kidney or whatever, so then that's going to have your genome information, and if you haven't patented it, so does it get patented before? So there are situations where, or like upon death, or like organ donation and all that, where something could get into somebody else's hands before it gets patented by the individual.
And then you have weird humans who have a transplant that become another human and things like that. Yeah.
So it's interesting that you mentioned the surgery thing. If you have something removed, they won't give it back to you.
They won't what?
They won't give it back to you. Like, it's you, like it's your kidney or whatever, but you're not allowed to have it, which I find very weird. I mean, I understand it, but at the same time, like, that's weird. And then they can kind of do whatever they want with it.
Because then,
placenta though, don't you?
yeah, some people get that.
Yeah, placenta, because there's like a weird cultural thing where you're like, that's normal. But like, if you have a tumor out, and say you also happen to be a biologist, like the amount of effort it takes to get your sample so that you could work on it and do whatever you need to do is insane. They're like, well, are you a doctor? No, but it's mine. It's mine. It's me. Give it back. Well, no, you can't have it.
Let's make a couple of things clear. So you can't patent a person's genome, right? You can't patent, no. So you just can't do that now. And there are laws on the book that prohibit, I think it's the Genetic Non-Discriminatory Act. That's a law in Canada that says no one's allowed to use information they might get about your genome to deny you any service whatsoever, including health insurance, including job employment, all kinds of stuff. So one, you cannot patent, your genome cannot be patented by you or anyone else. And if someone gets that information, it's illegal for them to use it in any way that might deprive you of any service. So just like to get that up.
The interesting example with this that I'm actually curious about the legality of it. So one of the most expensive drugs in the world was called Lefebvre. It is a gene therapy for a genetic disorder called lipoprotein lipase deficiency. If you have a broken version of this enzyme, your blood looks like milk from all of the oil buildup, and it is particularly prevalent in the Saguenay region of Quebec due to the founder effect. So whereas in the rest of the population it's like 1 in 1,000 people, in there it's like 1 in 50. What's a little odd is the company that eventually patented and made this drug and gave it to one patient before pulling it off the market because they charged $1 million for it. Who has $1 million to pay for a thing when you're dying? So they've patented this. which is odd because I'm fairly certain that the functional copy of the enzyme was, I mean, it's human, so it's definitely taken from someone. So somewhere down the line, it is somebody's, so you shouldn't be able to patent it, which is odd. And yet, nobody can make, there basically cannot be a competitive market. So basically, everybody who has this disease is fucked, because you just cannot make a treatment. That enzyme is the only thing that will ever fix this problem.
You can't make a treatment within a capitalist framework, right?
Mhm.
Yes,
That's true. Yeah.
So these are called orphan drugs, and many governments put aside money to deal precisely with these sorts of things.
And so a friend of mine actually reverse engineered this and made like a bootleg version, and is currently testing it, and it works. Well, it works in cells. We haven't tested it on any people yet. But there's like a very real conversation we've been having, which is, if we put this out, are we going to get just our pants sued off? Like, can the company actually come after us if this is natural in origin? And I mean, they got the sequence out of a paper, so technically it's also public knowledge. So like, why? How do they have a patent? Like, literally, how do they have a patent on this thing? So it's a very weird, weird set of circumstances.
Who issued the patent?
I don't remember.
All right.
No.
Let's leave the patents behind, and maybe we can conclude in some more positive speculative thoughts. Lancia, can you conclude this discussion, and like what are the questions we should be looking at as people involved in synthetic biology community?
We didn't talk too much about futurists, honestly.
Mhm.
Same one, but, so ideas that came out, trust, I didn't mean to put that at the top, but it's up there. Making life, so SynBio, like, oh sorry, this is wrong actually. Utopia, yeah. iGEM, because what should be in we talked about medical tourism being a fun thing potentially, but then what that could look like with immigration. Designer babies could be a good thing. Optimizing materials in production, food solutions, bringing biology back to people. A lot about transparency and accessibility seem to be what people want a lot of. Participatory design and removing bias. Yeah, and like fun things that we could have. You know, foods that solve food solutions, breweries where people can go and make whatever they dream of to fit. Let's say they have their genome sequenced and they need more of a certain vitamin, they can have a beer for that. You know, participatory. Yeah, potential that cells could make decisions that we can't predict. I thought that was kind of interesting. I don't think we really do know a few of the questions and problems that can come up. Yeah. And then some of the language, I guess, words that we still need to
Work on?
yeah. The motherhood one I thought was, personally I found really interesting just because we're taking away motherhood in a lot of ways. Like there's a possibility of taking away motherhood. So what does it mean then exactly to be a person? Engineering, all of the identity and ownership things that came up. Yeah,
Well,
kind of a few good things. Like, I'm glad you mentioned a few things, Brandiff, that I didn't know about. It's really nice to know. The constitutional, like you were saying, the non-discriminatory thing, because we talk about AI a lot in digital, and there's actually another panel tonight on AI, so it would kind of be interesting to see what comes out of that, what they end up discussing. And I was just thinking how a lot of what we talked about too, we talked about how we could look at maybe at the digital age and what came from it. Yeah, so.
For me, the interesting part was really, maybe thinking about copyright laws, and I think that was an interesting discussion. And then for me, what I'm most fascinated about as well is how how can we develop, or how can we, have participatory design, I think was really cool to mention, and how we can involve anyone or everyone with synthetic biology, whether it's by just, bringing them into a brewery or designing materials that come from synbio and being very open about that, and you can build your walls out of mycelia or things like that. I'm fascinated by that process as a topic that we maybe should talk about more, rather than designer babies and those things that go more into like law and patent law rather than the biology. So yeah, maybe some final comments.
There was actually someone last year who Atkin gave an award to that is she's trying to look at like mushroom material, like mycelium, and make like sustainable structures out of it.
Yeah. Fascinating. Okay, if there's no more final comments, let's grab some food and we can meet each other and continue chatting. I think we have the space till 7.